thanks for joining me at What the Franklin. I'm your host, Chip Franklin. We interview all sorts of shit stirrers and people of note today. One of my favorite is David Cay Johnston. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter for DCReport.org. He's also a distinguished visiting lecturer at the College of Law at the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University, and possibly knows more about Trump than even his own family. He's written many books about him. Most recently, The Making of Donald Trump. It's even worse than you think what the Trump administration is doing to America. And the latest, The Big Cheat. Today's episode is appropriately titled, Will Somebody Arrest This Son of a Bitch? Joining me right now is David Cay Johnston. Great to talk to you, although the circumstances are scaring the hell out of me. Good to have you here.
Well, they should scare the hell out of you at the moment, because what's happening in Ukraine can turn into a much, much larger series of invasions, not just by the Russians.
Yeah, let's start right there. I want to read from you from a Buck Sexton, who is a real person's name. He's a young guy with who wants to make, I get it, you're young, but he's interviewing Trump. And he asked Trump these leading questions, and Trump called Putin a genius. And he made these remarks to Buck Sexton on his podcast. He goes, I went in yesterday, this is Trump speaking, and there was a television screen. I said, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of Ukraine as independent. That's wonderful. How smart is that? He's going to be going as a peacekeeper. That's the strongest peace force. We could use that on our southern border. So, I think we've answered the question. How far can Trump go and still not lose Republicans? And pretty much it's right.
A little later into that, Chip, he also then said, of course, if I was president, Putin wouldn't be doing this, which makes his whole comment nonsensical and inconsistent. But that's Donald. That's how his jumbled his mind is.
You talk about his long history of avoiding real prosecution. You talk about his bars when they were serving 13-year-olds. And how did he go this long? In fact, today's episode is, will somebody finally arrest this son of a bitch? Right. And I guess that is the question. When is this going to happen?
Well, he is going to be indicted by the Manhattan grand jury. It seems like it's going on, and it is. But the principal reason right now is that Donald fought to keep his accounting records from the grand jury, went twice to the Supreme Court, was slapped down, completely slapped down both times. And when they got the documents, it wasn't 1 million pages, it was 5 million pages. And they have to go through all of those before they ask the grand jury to return an indictment. But that will happen there. He may be indicted in Fulton County, Georgia, for his efforts to rig the results of the Georgia election in 2020. It'll happen. But Donald, his whole life, has gotten away with the stuff for a very simple reason. He followed the advice taught to him in his early 20s by Roy Cohn, the notorious Roy Cohn, who'd been the consigliere to Senator Joe McCarthy and then became the consigliere literally to the heads of the two biggest mafia families in New York.
A really bad guy.
Terribly bad guy. And who reveled in the fact that he was constantly under investigation, but not indicted. And what Donald was taught by Roy Cohn is deny, 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 never give an inch of ground. Even if it's obvious something is true, you don't acknowledge that, and attack law enforcement. They're corrupt, they're dishonest, they're the bad guys. You're the victim. And Donald has done that brilliantly. And when he got to Atlantic City, which is where I first started covering him in 1988, so almost 34 years ago now, Donald's casinos gave liquor, limousines, suites, and even credit lines to 13 and 14-year-old children. I wrote about them in my first book in 1992, Temples of Chance. And he didn't lose his license, nor did the other casino owners who did the same thing. There is a reluctance by law enforcement in the United States generally to go after people who are high profile, wealthy, known to fight back, therefore exhausting limited government resources, and who know how to compromise people. And Donald has compromised many people. He tried to do it to me. I outsmarted him. But he succeeded in ruining the career of a Wall Street Journal reporter who really hadn't done anything wrong at all, but Donald made him look bad, and he had to leave journalism.
So you've known this guy a long time. You've been writing about him before any of us really knew him. Did you ever envision he would reach these heights? And even more to the point, David, Did you ever envision that he'd be followed by this group of blind sycophants?
Well, in 1989, when Donald brought his leased boat to Atlantic City, he claimed it was the 6th largest yacht in America. A group of people met him at the dock and screamed and yelled as if he was, Elvis Presley or something like that. And a man shouted out from the crowd, and I reported this at the time, "Donald, be our president." And Trump has been talking about why he and he alone should be president since 1987. So, yes, on the day he announced in 2015, I dropped everything I was doing and have since then focused exclusively on Donald Trump. And reporters wouldn't ask the questions they should be asking. They'd cover the horse race.
Right. Well, I mean, so obviously Donald Trump could not have been elected in 1988, right?
Right.
What part of the landscape changed and why did it change to allow him to get in?
This is one of the ironies of this, Chip. I wrote a best-selling trilogy of books earlier in this century, perfectly legal, about how rich people pay less taxes often than secretaries and police officers. Free lunch, about all the subsidies that go into big companies and wealthy individuals that nobody knew about until I wrote about it, and the fine print about monopolies and restraint of trade. And much of Donald's campaign rhetoric comes out of those books. Now, he didn't read my books. He watched me on television. And I know this because there were intermediaries who called me and would ask questions about it. But astonishingly, a lot of his stuff came right from me and from my books about what's wrong with these systems. And why did that appeal to people? Simple fact. In 2018, 90% of Americans made less money than in 1973. Now, I'm obviously adjusting for inflation, but in 1973, they got a full year's income. In 2018, they only got 50 weeks of income. Their health care was much more expensive. For every dollar of home equity they took on, they'd added $2 of debt. Pensions were largely gone by this point for people who hadn't already earned them. And many of those have been looted without Congress or prosecutors doing much about it. So Donald could appeal to people who were in terrible economic straits. And then you layer onto that his blatant appeal to white supremacy. Donald's always been a stone cold racist. And then on top of that, even though he's denounced Christians in writing as fools, idiots, and schmucks, and has said that his life philosophy is one word, revenge, which is, you can't be a Christian and say that revenge is your philosophy. The New Testament absolutely rejects revenge in any form. But he got all these Christian ministers, who claim to be Christians, I call them faux Christians, to support him.
Yeah, but can I jump in there, David? So a lot of these ministers are Old Testament, and revenge is a big part of the Old Testament.
Yes, but then they're not Christians. If you're an Old Testament believer in that, you can't be a Christian. But I agree with you about that. But my point is that these forces came together. And how did those forces come about? Well, in large part, the Republicans put the policies in place, but the Democrats, who ought to be representing working people, didn't stand up for working people. They allowed these things to happen. In many cases, they voted for them.
So in other words, it wasn't so much, social media obviously sped this process up because there's, right. But at the heart of this, I mean, there's so many comparisons to Hitler, right? Which I don't want to really do too many, but obviously Hitler came out of the Treaty of Versailles, a Germany that was in horrible straits and people that were desperate, right? The world had their foot on their neck. That wasn't the truth here. I mean, we came out of pretty prosperous times out of Obama.
Well, when people feel, rightly or wrongly, that they don't have any control over their future, they listen to people like Donald who say, I alone can save you. And, look at right now. We've had record job creation since the Biden administration began. Under Donald Trump, the economy was slowly going downhill, which we've documented at dcreport.org, the news service that I run with friends of mine, and shown that his economic performance was terrible. Joe Biden actually exceeded the economic growth that Donald Trump said he would produce and never came close to. He missed it by 2/3. And yet polls show people think the economy has gone to hell in a handbasket. This tells you that many people, first of all, are getting information from places that disinform them. Night after night, I watch Tucker Carlson so that other people don't have to, where he says, I'm rooting for Russia.
Well, but I tell David, if I can jump in there, Obama created more jobs by 1.5 million more jobs in his last 3 years than Trump did in his first 3. And Trump never had a 3.0% growth in the GDP. He never had a 3% growth, where Clinton had 3 years of 4%. So, I mean, you're right. I mean,
Biden had more than 6.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously Fox News is a big part of this problem. OAN and Newsmax to a lesser extent. You won your Pulitzer Prize in 2001, right, for beat reporting?
Yes.
Okay.
For writing about taxes.
Is there beat reporting happening right now? I mean, I know that you can say Schmidt and others for the Post, and they're doing a great job, but Schmidt from the New York Times, and of course the Washington Post writers have done a great job. Lenig and Rucker and others. But are we doing our jobs in the media covering this guy? Or are we covering him too much? There's a lot of people on both left and right that trying to figure out, like, why am I asking you questions right now? He's not running for president yet. Yet he's commenting on something. And if he has this 50 million people that'll do what he says, Christ, what do we do now? Seriously, how do we counter this?
So first of all, during the campaign, the coverage was just terrible. And I did everything I could to try and get the right things out there and failed, frankly, unless you read my work. Since the campaign, there's been vastly better coverage of things Trump was doing, though not of what he did to our government. That's what we focus on at DC Report. It's been the palace intrigues, and then you have all this loose, disconnected stuff about this or that corrupt act. And my new book, The Big Cheat, which is the third in my Trump trilogy, I take all these threads that are lying on the floor and don't connect, and I weave them into a tapestry. And that's what all the reviews at Amazon, people who read it, say. My goodness, I didn't connect any of these things, didn't know many of them. Now I see what they were doing. And I would fault my peers for not having done this in news form in the Times where I used to work, or the Post, or other places. By
the way, I just ordered your book right now on Amazon. So
thank you, sir.
I gotta keep it. You're hard to keep track of. I don't talk to you for a couple of months. You write another damn book. But
so the other thing to keep in mind here is Donald's never going to be president again. He's going to be indicted, and that's going to change it. What I worry.
Stop right again. Say that again, please.
Yeah, Donald is going to be indicted.
No, before that, Donald Trump is never going to be president again.
Of the United States again. That's not going to happen. But that's not the worst part. The worst thing is the people in waiting, because Donald is lazy. He's ignorant. He doesn't know. He's not a good manager, as I've documented for more than 3 decades. But people waiting in the wings who want to be president, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, Ron DeSantis, Rick Scott, the Florida senator who should have been indicted and imprisoned for stealing $1.5 billion and somehow miraculously escaped prosecution. They all want to be president, and they are competent. They're properly educated. They know how management works. They could destroy our liberties. And that's what we need to worry about, is a competent Donald Trump equivalent. And that's a real threat.
I agree with you in the substance of that, but Trump has this kind of sick magic over these people,
Very charismatic.
Yeah. And you go down the list, and Josh Hawley doesn't have that. DeSantis doesn't have that. Abbott, none of these guys have that, and part of it is that the years of being around, entertainment, that he gets it. You can lie, especially now. You just lie. What was it? Again, I hate to go back to
big lie. Goebbels repeated often enough, people believe it. But imagine Donald, after he's indicted, saying, well, I can't run for president because I'm tied up with this frivolous litigation, but I'm anointing, and he puts his hand on someone and says, this is the person you need. Now that you need to be very worried, because his followers will follow him. And his followers, and many of them, are absolute morons. Today I was reading Tucker Carlson's column online, and the responses to it. Donald Trump is a sophisticated, highly educated man who knows what he's doing. In fact, he's as if you brought Albert Einstein and John Wayne into one person. My God, that couldn't be more apart from reality. Than it's totally delusional. But people who believe that, They are not going to be swayed.
David, here's the thing, though, that gets me about Carlson and Hannity. And I knew these guys, and you did too, back in the early 90s. You know, I knew there was a thing called in DC called Hotwire. You remember that thing? They used to fax information. And I knew a bunch of those guys. In fact, I did a show from when I was on WMAL in the 90s. I did a show from the bedroom of Howard Mortman, who now is one of the head guys up at C-SPAN. His good friend. And Chuck Todd was there, and Tucker was there. And I didn't really remember meeting them, but I've heard stories since then. And I remember these guys, and they were just young guys. And I remember talking to Tucker Carlson, maybe even as late as 98. And he was a normal guy. Now, I know that in this business, when the business of opinion, sometimes you'll take a bit of a role. You know, when I started out, I was more right than I am left, a lot more, right? Yeah. But never against gay rights, or I was always pro-choice. But, you know, fiscally, I could see it. And then in 2000, when I saw the first subprime lie, and then later in 08, when I saw it again, you know, what we were doing to protect these, I kind of fell off it. But there's a lot of money in that adulation, and he gets it. So in some ways, Tucker Carlson is the worst person on the planet. He's worse than Trump.
Tucker Carlson, who is a triple trust funder to begin with, he grew up very wealthy.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, oh yeah, tuna, frozen fish sticks, things like that. Tucker Carlson.
Wait, so he doesn't need this money? This is all about ego?
Yeah, he is reportedly paid $36 million a year by Fox. He's the number one host in America on cable TV, and no, but he has visions of himself becoming the president of the United States.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, he's said things about this, and people around him have said things about this. And even if he isn't, he wants to be this major influence player. And it's very clear that Tucker Carlson, who has a superb education, went to very good schools, has completely gone off the deep end. I mean, this is a man who literally said, "I'm rooting for Russia." If when I was in junior high school around 1960, if a teacher had said, you know, the day will come when the Republican Party will denounce American intelligence and military and law enforcement and say, we trust the Russians, I would have gone to the principal's office and said, you've got a school teacher who needs to have a psychiatric examination.
Well, David, hang on a second. Let me play that. Let me play a little bit of what you're talking about for everybody.
But in Washington, the theme remains in force. Russia, 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 Russia is bad. Why is it disloyal to side with Russia, but loyal to side with Ukraine? Apparently, Ukraine's eastern border with Russia, unlike, say, our southern border with Mexico, is a sacred boundary.
So that is Tucker Carlson to a T, obviously. That why are we rooting for Ukraine over Russia? I mean, isn't it kind of the heart of who we are and have always been?
Well, yes, individual liberty ought to be very important. And Putin is a man who, you know, he jailed the girls' band Pussy Riot. He is a ruthless dictator, and right now his whole case is built on lies. 1,000 years ago, Kiev, which is really the home of Greater Russia, right. Kiev was a thriving city 1,000 years ago. Moscow was a couple of huts in the forest, literally. And yet he says, oh no, this has always been Russian territory. And remember, this is the 5th war he started since he became the modern czar. He won the previous 4 wars. I don't know how much further he's going to expand. I've been to Ukraine. A lot of my friends there and here believe he only is going to take at the moment the eastern strip to give him a straight shot down to the Crimea and control of a crucial dam for agriculture. But if he goes on, if he takes Kiev and Lviv and the rest of the country, Viktor Orban wants to have Greater Hungary. There are large enclaves, including relatives of mine, who are ethnic Hungarians across the border in Slovakia and other countries, and he would like to take those by force.
Will he maneuver around NATO countries? Is that the idea?
Well, the people.
I mean, if he attacks a NATO country, that's it, right?
We are obligated to protect those countries. But the prime ministers of the 3 little Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they were all, and have been for about 10 years now, telling every journalist who will listen, sooner or later, Putin's going to just appear with his tanks and take us over overnight. I mean, they're small countries, and probably one day a well-poised strike could take them in a day. And so we need to be really worried about this and about unleashing other dictators who have these visions of redrawing boundaries.
Is some of this because Putin perceives a weakness in our American political system right now?
I don't think Putin cares about our political system. I really don't. I mean, he is going to do what he wants to do. Remember that Putin said the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, I would think the greatest tragedy is World War II,
a Holocaust,
World War I,
yeah,
the pandemic in 1918 to 1921. But no, what Putin has said repeatedly is that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he intends to put it back together. That's clearly what he intends to do. And he's in office for life. His legislature is simply an instrument of allowing him to do what he wants to do. And they gave him authority to murder people overseas who are perceived to be enemies of the state. And he's been doing that. They've given him authority to recognize the provinces that are now occupied by Russian soldiers in Ukraine. And so Putin is going to do what he wants to do. And the danger for us is that this encourages other people. Remember that President Xi wants greater China. He wants to bring Taiwan back into China. We're obligated to protect the Taiwanese too, but the Chinese at least think in long term. It might take them 100 years. They're just going to continue to work at it.
They think in decades and centuries instead of, let me ask you this, David. So Trump won't be president. As we head to 2022, and if the I guess the suspected bloodbath of the Democrats in the fall does come through, and I'm not totally convinced it will, but it seems like that's likely, and most off-year elections it happens. Does that make Trump more the table setter? Even if he doesn't get the nomination, if he decides he wants to run, is there really enough to stop him? I know you said there's no way he could be there, but who stops him and how?
Well, he could run, but he's going to be under indictment by then. And that's the difficulty. In 2024, he will be facing at least one indictment and lots of civil suits. And as I point out in my New York Daily News piece, he ultimately is at risk of being stripped down to nothing but his presidential and union pensions, which are protected by Congress. And since then, several prosecutors have said, yeah, that's right. They agree with my point. People who have stripped people of their assets over their conduct. But the Democrats will lose only if they fail to get out the vote. The polling data shows, for example, that the public, including a majority of Republicans, reject our current tax policies that allow billionaires to live tax-free, and the kind of things I was exposing as far back as 25 years ago in the New York Times about the wealthy people and corporations and their taxes. They show that there is broad support for the infrastructure, for childcare, et cetera, various changes. So the only reason that the Republicans would gain control of the House and Senate, which would be a disaster for Biden, is if the Democrats don't get the vote out. And that's why the Republicans are passing all these laws to limit the franchise. They want to ensure white supremacy. And I mean, let's not beat around the bush about it. John Glover Roberts, the Chief Justice of the U.S., when he was a Justice Department lawyer, his job was to make sure Black people couldn't vote. And he's the one who gutted the Voting Rights Act. The governors of Florida and Texas and Mississippi and Alabama are white supremacists. And they're trying every way they can to make life miserable for people who are not with them in their view that white people are superior. So all the Democrats have to do is first, get people registered. Second, monitor to make sure those registrations stick and have lawyers on the ready if there's a problem. And third, get people to fill out their ballots and vote. That's all they have to do. I mean, we had a war over white supremacy that caused every 40th American to die. All you have to do here is vote. And I'm sorry if you have to stand in line for 10 hours. That's terrible. But that really isn't much of a burden compared to the more than 1 million people who died for this country.
Okay. Big cheat obviously refers to the continued lie that the election in 2020.
No, it's about money. It's
about good. Well, there you go.
What Donald Trump did in the White House, he and his family and his cronies, they submarined American national security to make money. They engaged in transactions that were improper to make money. One of the cabinet
Not enough money, apparently, though, to have his thing is collapsing on him, right? I mean,
there's never enough money.
Yeah, okay.
If you're Donald Trump.
Right.
Elaine Chao, also known as Mrs. Mitch McConnell, committed criminal acts left and right. Nothing was done. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, the former vulture capitalist. Wilbur Ross lied and denied, and throughout the period he was Commerce Secretary, was involved in deep business relationships with the oligarchs. And who are the oligarchs? They're the criminal gang that owns.
Doesn't Ross sit on the board of the Bank of Cyprus?
He was not just on the board, he was vice chairman, and the other vice chairman of the Bank of Cyprus was a Putin appointee, and that is the most notorious money laundering bank for Russian criminal money. And who did they hire? Well, he was there to run the bank. The disgraced head of Deutsche Bank, which is the other big bank famous for laundering Russian money. So what I do in this book is I take all these stories that appeared, there's an item in the Washington Post, and then one in the LA Times, and one in the Wall Street Journal that, first of all, most people would never see because they don't read all of those, unlike me, and drew them all together and show how there is this pattern that we've never had. The most corrupt presidents in the past aren't even in the league of what was going on here. Donald Trump simply saw the White House as another grifting opportunity. Now, he didn't do as well as a lot of other people because he's not competent. He's not very good, and he's also deeply, deeply mentally ill. But
I laugh, but he is a sociopath. I mean,
you've seen the man be delusional on TV. I've pointed out examples of where he's doing things that are utterly delusional. And one good example of this, Chip, I am a worldwide recognized authority in tax for my expertise. I've lectured on tax on every continent but Antarctica. My next book will propose a whole new tax system for the United States that's much better than what we have now. Donald says he's the greatest expert in all time about taxes, the greatest expert ever in the history of the world. When he gets under oath, I don't know anything. I don't know. I have no idea. It's just bluster and lies because he's a con. The thing to respect about Donald Trump, and I admire this about him, is he is the greatest con man in the history of the world. He conned his way into
David, most con men leave town after their con. He stayed there.
And that was the point of the art of the deal, is he would con people, rip them off. He bragged about the frauds he committed in that book back in the 1970s. And then he would go, 1980s, and he would go on to the next target. Once he became president, he couldn't do that anymore. And that's why you're now seeing these investigations with subpoena power that he's fighting left and right and claiming that the prosecutors coming after him, the three prominent ones are all black. He says they're vicious, racist radicals. But he's not addressing the substance of the charges, and the existing criminal case against the Trump Organization, which is wholly owned by Donald, and Alan Weisselberg, his chief financial officer. Donald and his lawyers don't dispute the facts. They just say, so what? It's a multi-million-dollar tax fraud. And they go, so what? Oh, it's only $1.7 million. The median wage earner in America would have to work 40 years almost to make $1.7 million.
All right, David. So a couple more questions here, and I really appreciate your time. Again, the new book is called The Big Cheat. It's been out since November. Amazon loves it. I just ordered a copy. I've read your other stuff, and it's interesting as we go through these chapters. Before I ask you to write the final chapter of Donald Trump, what you think is going to happen in the next 15 years, will his children and who close to him will be indicted as well?
Well, I expect the Manhattan grand jury will bring a New York State, not federal, New York State racketeering charge called Article 460 charge. And I expect that will cover Donald, the Trump Organization, his three older children, Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, because they're officers of the corporation, and Alan Weisselberg, possibly some other people. Now, Alan Weisselberg has partial immunity, so he might not be covered. I don't know. No one knows enough of the details to tell that.
But he's talking right now, right? He did? We assume?
He gave some limited testimony. And New York has this very unusual law. And let me digress. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been a professor of law for years at Syracuse University's law school. New York law, if you are called before the grand jury, you are automatically immunized for what you testify about. Yeah. So clearly they didn't think Alan Weisselberg was that important for some issues. But what I expect will happen is as follows. Donald will be indicted in Manhattan. He'll be civilly sued by the New York State Attorney General. He will be probably
before the midterms.
I don't know. We don't know how fast they're able to move ahead, but one would certainly hope so. He's going to face civil lawsuit and possible prosecution in the District of Columbia over the presidential inaugural money. And where did that $1.7 million go? And there's a chapter in my book about how they want to take money off the books for that inaugural, presumably from Russia. And so going forward, Donald is going to be in litigation for the rest of his life, even if he lives into his 90s, as his parents did. He is going to be in endless litigation. He is at severe risk, as others have now agreed with me about. I was the first to say this, of losing everything but those federally protected pensions.
But won't Americans give him money, though? Won't they just?
Sure, but he could also have that stripped away from him. Really? And hopefully we will get some reform of our campaign finance laws, because you shouldn't be able to raise money for a campaign and use it to enhance your own lifestyle, or I would argue, give it to other politicians. In fact, I've argued for years that we should have a law that says you can only get campaign donations from people who reside in the jurisdiction you represent, either your congressional district or your state. Why should people in California be financing the campaign of a congressman where I live in Western New York?
So at the end of the day, and let's say it's 2025 and a Republican is president, it won't be Donald Trump, but he'll be like Queen Elizabeth and the new president will be the prime minister. Is that kind of the way they'll view it?
I think anybody who actually gets into the job is going to do what they want to do, but someone who gets there, they're going to have the skills Donald didn't have, and your liberties will be under severe attack. Right now, the big fight going on in the Republican Party is not over whether Donald is in control. It's over how far to the right are they going to go. The candidates running against Governor Abbott in Texas make him look like a liberal. Now, they're not going to win, but they think he's a liberal. And there are a lot of people running for office in the Republican Party who want to repeal the 13th and 14th Amendments. I mean, I wrote briefly in the New York Times years ago about the people who want to repeal the 14th Amendment. There are people who want to take away.
14th Amendment. By the way, for people, the 14th Amendment is a smorgasbord. What's the word? I mean, you have in there about freedom for slaves. You also have due process. I mean, if you got rid of the 14th Amendment, you would set the country back pretty far.
Oh yeah, no, we could go way back in time. There are people who want to make this explicitly a Christian nation when the Constitution in two places makes it clear that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And who want to basically turn the country into a white supremacist dream. And we need to be really worried. I mean, I hope the American public isn't as stupid as the guy who said, Donald Trump is this sophisticated, cultured, educated genius. And the test of that's going to be, are people going to turn out to protect their liberties and to have American democracy endure, or are they going to turn us into a dictatorship, which is what I said Donald would do in 2015. I said he would never leave the White House voluntarily. And my track record so far and the things I predicted about Donald continues to be a batting average of 1.000. Every single thing I was right about.
Well, good. I hope that means the arrest. That's good. If I'm going to take you up on that 1,000%.
Well, he'll probably be just formally booked. He'll surrender. They'll fingerprint him. They'll photograph him.
Will there be riots from his people when he's arrested?
When he's arrested, I expect there will be violence. And certainly if he is convicted, there will be violence. And one of the things prosecutors have to worry about is a ringer on a jury, somebody who lies in the voir dire process and intends to give a hung jury. But we will. I said back in 2015, we will not get out of this without violence. And at DC Report, we've taken the position that we are in the low-grade early stages of a new civil war. And it's partly because I went back and read a lot.
I want to hear that shit.
I went back and read a lot of newspaper accounts before the attack on Fort Sumter. It was seen as coming for a long, long time. Yeah. And when you look at that in historical perspective, when you keep in mind that Watergate, from the day of its conception to Nixon leaving the White House, was 2 years and 8 months. These things take time. They go in stages. But all we
had real people in office then, real Republicans, real Americans.
Yes,
we got Kinzinger and Cheney and maybe a few other stragglers, which is insane. If you're talking about 275 people between the two chambers, it's nuts. Yeah,
it is. We've moved very radically to the right, and I believe the core underlying reason for that is the combination of white supremacist views. That's political correctness. Is the people who oppose that want the right to speak in slurs of fellow Americans, and combine that with this loss of economic improvement for a half century. Of course, people are rejecting it. What did the polls show about young people? The millennials and the Zs, they think socialism is a great system. And given their life experience, think about what's happened to this country. The collapse of the economy in 2008, what's happened with the pandemic, of the gazillionaires who pay no taxes. Surprise, surprise, young people are saying there's no future for me.
Well, young people do that. Remember the old saying, anybody that's not a socialist by the time they're 40 has no heart. Anybody that's a socialist after they're 40 has no heart.
When I were young, you didn't have to worry about finding a job if you were sober, showed up, weren't a druggie.
Right. Yeah.
You could find work, and that's no longer true.
David, great to see you. You look great. Great work as always, my friend. Stay safe, okay?
Take care.
We'll be after you. Be in touch. All right. Thanks a lot. Again, that is David Cay Johnston. The latest book is The Big Cheat. And he's got other books. As I mentioned before, The Making of Donald Trump, or the one I just recently read. It's even worse than you think, what the Trump administration is doing to America. This is What the Franklin. Stay in touch. We post twice a week. We'll see you next time.